Carhartt jacket on, 5:30 a.m., feeling like the ace of spades.
Before and during the Civil War, many minorities were forced into slavery. During this time, these slaves had to work on the land of white plantation owners in harsh circumstances. Most of the times, if the slave resisted, they succumbed to beatings, starvation, and sometimes death. After the Civil War and the abolition of slavery, former slaves looked for land and a place to support their families, while white landowners were looking for laborers for their land. Thus, sharecropping was born. During this time, sharecroppers, former slaves, were given supplies, food, clothes, and shelter for a small price of 30 to 70% of their crops as payment for the things provided. Sharecroppers saw this as fair since they were able to plan on shared land and gained independence to support their families. This land, despite having to sacrifice crops, was the driving force to give former slaves the independence they longed for. While sharecropping was the norm from the end of the Civil War until the 1950s, in Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred D. Taylor, the main character, Cassie, and her family was one of the few African American families that were able to own their own land.
Look out there, Cassie girl, all that belongs to you. You ain't never had to live on nobody's place but your own. And as long as I live and the family survives, you'll never have to. That's important. You may not understand that now, but one day you will. Then you'll see. Page 7.
The land is so important to Cassie's family because it represents their independence from the white landowners, an independence that isn't felt by many other African American families during this time. Boycotts occurred frequently during this time period due to blatant racial inequalities, and when African American sharecroppers participated in these boycotts of white store owners in their town, landowners would often punish their laborers by taking a higher percentage of the cotton production.
Mr. Granger making it hard on us, David. Said we're gonna have to give him 60% of the cotton instead of 50. Now that the cotton's planted, it's too late to plant more. Don't suppose, though, that it makes much difference. Page 203.
Because sharecroppers lived on shared land, they didn't have much say in what the landowners wanted. They didn't own land, so they didn't have independence from the white landowners. They were solely dependent on them, meaning that they had to agree with any and all propositions. While Cassie's family weren't sharecroppers, they faced the same injustices that sharecroppers did, because their land used to belong to Mr. Granger, and he would do whatever he needed to get it back under his control again. However, they weren't going to give up their land because they deserved to be there just as much as any white landowner did. They knew that they had an independence that black sharecroppers didn't have, land, and that just added fuel to the already blazing fire.
You see that fig tree over yonder, Cassie? Them other trees all around, that oak and walnut. They're a lot bigger and they take up more room and give so much shade they almost overshadow that little old fig. But that fig tree's got roots that run deep and it belongs in that yard as much as that oak and walnut. Page 205 to 206.
The thing is, many sharecroppers are still alive today. There are several accounts from these former slaves.
No slavery. You just absolutely worked for your board and keep.
My parents and I worked the whole year, and they would make $300. Some folk make that in a day's time now.
Sometimes I tell you, I get sad about it. Sad. Then again, I get mad. So many different kinds of feelings. But we didn't have no other choice. We had to do it. We didn't have no other choice.
I was going right down the road. And I looked down the road and my mind go back to, when you just didn't have anything. When you go to school all day without anything to eat. And they would have a turnip patch, for the school cafeteria for the cooks. And that's how we would eat. Sometimes go out there in the turnip patch and, get some turnips and things and eat them.
Where they delved deeper into the hardships and mistreatment they endured during much of the 1930s. Sometimes they even allowed themselves to have hope that one day they, along with their family and friends, would be truly free. But in Cassie's case, that hope dwindled.
Yet the mud and the rain and the dust would all pass. I knew and understood that. What had happened to TJ in the night, I did not understand, but I knew that it would not pass. And I cried for those things which happened in the night and would not pass. I cried for TJ and the land. Page 276.
The idea that many of these people are still alive today is harrowing to hear. Many of them, even today, are suffering from poor living conditions. They often live in poverty and are barely able to survive. Those that have lived this life talk about how they weren't given the chances to truly thrive.
Miss Lucille, was you a sharecropper? Was your mother a sharecropper?
Yes. She done the same thing. $15 all the week for the wreck all the week. 5 days in the week. $15.
They followed the rules given or suffered consequences. This is life today for a group of people that were discriminated against and bullied into cheap labor with harsh living conditions.
I say we were under slave. We have to do everything they tell us to do.
These families are still suffering. When someone is suffering, we have to help them. We can't stand idly by because that adds to the problem. Like Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. We must lend a helping hand in order to build up these people and help them to thrive. Sometimes you have to hold on to hope for what feels like an eternity before it finally reaches you.